Today we're starting a new series, Sign Out. In 2007, Steve Jobs, who is the CEO of Apple, introduced a product that he said would, in his words, quote, change everything. He said, quote, today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. Now, that was 11 years ago, and you know that is exactly what happened. The iPhone has forever changed the way that we perceive the phone. What is a phone to my children, Matthew and James, who are 2.5 and 5 months, will be different forever than it was for me and maybe for you too. They will never know what one of these is, except maybe they will see it in a museum somewhere, or I can tell them about back in the old days we had these phones and you had to go to dial somebody. I mean, we grew up with a phone like this. And then, of course, we evolved into the miracle of the touch tone phone. These are also going the way of that other kind of phone. You still see, sometimes you see these around. We still have these in our offices here. But for Matthew and James, for Matthew, he already knows how to work it. The phone is this, the iPhone or the Android, a smartphone. Now, the use of the phone has changed over the years. When Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, it was for purposes, it was really an update of the old telegraph machine, where instead of sending a message with someone through a telegraph, you could actually talk to them. And, of course, you ran wire to be able to do that. And later there was the wireless communication through phones. But these devices are used by people, and most of the time they are not used for talking to people. The Apple company announced in 2016 that on average, people unlock their phones, which is where you have to go in, you have to either swipe or you put in a code, or sometimes it recognizes your thumbprint. That people unlock their phone an average of 80 times per day, which that breaks down to about 6 to 7 times per hour. They also say that on average, the average person spends 4 hours a day, more than 4 hours a day, interacting with their phone in some form or fashion. That's over a quarter or almost a quarter of your waking hours. And of those 4+ hours, about 22%, less than a quarter, is spent actually in a conversation with someone. In 2007, the text message surpassed the actual phone conversation as the primary means by which people communicate with one another. And we know that it's not just during the daytime that people use these. 100 million users, it says that 100 million users check their phones in the middle of the night. And of course, anybody here? Anybody? And of course, they're designed such that the white light that these phones give off are sort of, it tricks your eyes to make you think that it's daytime. And so it makes it harder to go back to sleep, sometimes impossible to go back to sleep if you check your phone in the middle of the night. 43% of users say they check their phone within the first 5 minutes of waking up every morning. Again, anybody here? And 46% say they cannot imagine life without a smartphone. 58%, which leads to natural questions about addiction, being addicted to our smartphone. Actually, they show that something about it has an addictive quality. And 59% of parents say that their teen is addicted to their smartphone. And 28% of teens say their parents are addicted to their smartphones. It goes both ways, and actually studies show that the teens might be being a little bit more honest than the parents, actually, in those particular surveys. The psychiatrists have actually come up with specific qualities or characteristics of addiction that apply to smartphone usage. One of being that you can't resist the impulse to use it, that you check it without even thinking about it, that you use it for longer than you intended, that you use it in hazardous conditions, i.e. driving, okay? Or that use of it impairs your relationships or your functioning in work or school. Again, anybody. All of those are signs of addiction. And so probably like 90% of us are addicted to it. That probably includes me as well. So there's something about the tech. This is not just the case with smartphones. I think it's especially the case with smartphones just because of the incredible product that it is. But there's something about technology and the way that we make things in order to make our lives, to improve our lives and to make our lives more convenient, to make our lives better, is that not only do we invent these things, but that we also become dependent upon these things. And such that we can't imagine life without it, and maybe not even able to function without it. Instead of this being a tool for you to use to make your life better, you become the tool of it. And so it's worth asking the question, there's no question that these have made our lives more, many things in our lives more convenient. Maybe even we could say that they've made things easier, we're able to function more efficiently. But it's worth asking the question, do they make our lives better? And maybe even more importantly, to ask, do they make us better? Because the way that people interact with each other has been fundamentally changed and might be forever changed. We'll have to wait and see. But they've been fundamentally changed because of these devices. And as a result, we spend less time actually talking to each other. And we spend more time communicating through social media, text messaging, other media, but there's less time in actual conversation. I could say it like this, is that we are, through the technology, the incredible technology of the smartphone and the internet and the digital world, that we are now literally available to everybody. I mean, that is incredible. That couldn't have been imagined just a generation ago. Literally anyone in any part of the world could interact with you instantaneously. Maybe it's on Facebook, maybe it's on Twitter, maybe it could be through a text message, okay? But you are literally available to everybody. But as a result, what that means, that unlimited availability has led to being present to nobody. That we're always available or we're attentive to our mobile devices or what's going on in the digital world, but we're not attentive, we're not present to the people in our lives. The real people, which not say those are not real people that you're interacting with, but the people who are physically present, flesh and blood in front of you. The people who live under our roofs, our parents, our kids, our friends, our spouses, the person who's waiting in line next to you at the courthouse to get your driver's license, okay? Those people, those are real people. And as a result, what's happening is that when we're distracted or when we're bored, we're giving attention to our mobile devices. We're not giving attention to other people. Sherry Turkle has written about this, and she describes it as that we're more together than ever before. That we have ability to interact with more people than ever before. You can go back and check how many likes you get on your Facebook, and then you go back and check again and again. It kind of gives you like a little high, just to check and see. We're more together, but we're also more alone. That we have less meaningful interaction. We talk to each other less because it's harder. It's easier. Technology makes things easier. But developing meaningful relationships is not easy. In her book, Reclaiming Conversation, she describes something that's called the 7-minute rule. That basically it means that it takes 7 minutes of talking to each other before you discover that the conversation is really going to be interesting. She actually found this out through experimentation, that usually it's about the 7-minute mark where you get past kind of those superficial conversations and you get to a place to where that you're actually ready to connect, and somebody has to either share something. I'm sorry about that. It takes about 7 minutes to get past the superficial. Usually somebody has to ask a question, or you have to share something vulnerable. Maybe there's a moment of silence, and I'm sorry, that was a good one, Mark. Very fun. This, I think it's like one of those group texting. You ever get on that group? Stop there. Okay, yeah, great. So, but actually, studies show that if you have one of these on your desk when you're at school or doing homework or working, that your brain functions at a lower cognitive capacity than if this is not here. And why do you think that is the case? Why is it so hard to go past those 7 minutes of conversation to really get deep and connect with somebody? Why does our brain function at a lower level when we're even closer to them, or especially when we're attentive to them? It's because of distraction. Because we're distracted. We're parentally distracted. Constant distraction leads to less meaningful interaction. Because we're available to everybody, we're not present to anybody. And especially those people in our lives, those people that we live our lives with. And it's so tempting for all of us. Because literally, you have a world of information at your fingertips. You're watching a movie, or you're watching a TV show, or you're having a conversation and something jogs your memory and you want to know more about it. All you got to do is look down, pick it up, and thanks, Justin. Justin texted me right now. But you have to, see, you distracted me. You distracted me in the middle of my sermon. But literally, where was I? What was I talking about? We have a world at our fingertips. That's a good example of that, of what just happened. We have a world of information at our fingertips. But as a result, what happens is that when we're distracted by that, we're not present to the real people in our lives. And I bet that all the meaningful moments in your life, they happen when you went past that 7-minute rule and you had a conversation. You had a meaningful conversation. You got vulnerable and you opened up yourself to have a conversation with them. You see, this is the way the digital world works. The digital world cleans us up. It cleans up our mess. And it puts us in control. It cleans us up. In other words, the digital you, that digital person that someone interacts with, is the person you want them to see. It's the person you want to be. And a lot of times, there's that one person, okay? There's that one person out there, and the impression you give to them matters more to you than anybody else. And so when you post that on social media, you think about what they're going to think when they see it. And I bet the picture you put, or the angle, or the side, or whatever, that's going to be portraying the best possible perspective. And an interesting thing, too, about social media is that, or in the digital world, there's really only one sense that you're using, is your sight. You got 5 senses. Okay, use those other senses. They don't come into play in the digital world. You don't get to smell what that looks like, in Facebook or something like that. And then people put like their injuries on Facebook. This is where I got my arm cut off. Don't you want to see that? No, thank you. Okay, but besides that, the digital world we clean ourselves up, and we are in complete control. We're in control. What we say, whether or not we respond, we are in complete control. In a text message, you can delete it, you can't delete it once you've sent it, but you can go back and delete what you've typed. You can delete a social media post. We are in complete control. But here's the problem. Actual conversation, meaningful interaction is messy, and it requires relinquishing control. Actual conversation is messy and requires relinquishing control. Sometimes you say the wrong thing. Sometimes things just come out and you don't have a chance to control it. Or sometimes you forgot what you should say. You didn't have time to think of the right kind of response. And if you're going to actually enter into a meaningful relationship, and if you're going to connect with someone in a meaningful way, you have to be willing to meet them halfway, relinquish control. If you have to dominate the conversation, constantly interrupt, you have to win every argument, you have to make every point, eventually that other person is going to stop talking because you're not going to be listening. And so then you're going to wonder why nobody's listening, why you feel so alone. It's because you're too afraid to relinquish control, to take the step of faith, to do the work that's required for real relationships. And that can go for relationships with other people in our lives, for our spouse, for our kids, for our friends, and it goes for our relationship with God. Maybe the reason we don't feel connected to God isn't because God's not there and God's not speaking, but because we're too distracted. Jesus had an encounter with his disciples with two sisters. The Bible says that they visited them. They had friends that they oftentimes called upon and went to visit. And Jesus tells us about this visit. And one of the sisters is distracted. She is multitasking. She's organizing. She's being responsible. And the other seems not to be. And we're told the story in Luke chapter 10, beginning in verse 38. It says that as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. Now Martha, which is interesting that it says her home, that wasn't customarily the way that a woman actually owned a home. Women usually weren't allowed to own property in that day. We're told her name is Martha, and in verse 39 it says that her sister was named Mary. Now, some speculate that maybe this is the Martha and Mary who were the sisters of Lazarus. They were close friends of Jesus. That could be, but Mary was a very common name, so it's also possible that it was someone different. It says Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. Just before this, Jesus talks about how the disciples are going to have to go into people's houses to share the good news with them, and some are going to receive you, and some are not going to receive you. So the theme seems to be hospitality. And in this case, this seems to be a story about hospitality. Jesus comes in and is speaking, and Mary is sitting at the Lord's feet listening. She seems to be listening, not just hearing what Jesus is saying, which sometimes we can do, but she is listening with the intent to understand. That's different than actually listening. Sometimes we can hear it, yeah, but we're not really trying to understand. We just want to think, how can I get out of this conversation to get back to looking at my phone or doing something else, which is really interesting to me. She is listening. She is sitting at Jesus' feet listening with the intent to understand. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She's busy attending to the mess, cleaning up, preparing. Because that's what you have to do to be a good hostess, to show hospitality. But she's become so distracted by all the other things that she's forgetting the main thing. She's forgetting the whole point of hospitality in the first place. 40b. She came to him. This is Martha, sorry. Martha came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself?" Now, a good hostess usually is focused on the guest. We see that her distraction, her being busy running back and forth, that's really her focus is on herself. Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Now, in this story, I can relate to Martha probably better than I can to Mary. Martha is busy serving. She's being responsible, right? She's preparing. And we know that serving is good. Jesus teaches that. He sets the example of servanthood. But what's the point here? The point is that Martha is so busy with all the other things that she's missing the gift of the present moment and what's happening in the present moment. And what's happening in the present moment? Jesus Christ is in her house. He is in her house. And He's not going to be in her house forever. I mean, in His physical body presence. It's only 3 years of ministry on earth. And probably He's just here for a short afternoon visit. And so Mary is taking the most of this opportunity. And she's sitting at the Lord's feet. And she is listening. She is connecting. She is entering into a conversation. She is growing through this experience. Martha is missing it because she's too distracted. We have a picture on our wall, Molly and I do at home. It's a picture my brother-in-law took. He's like a professional photographer, and we were at the beach a couple years ago, and the best time to take a picture at the beach is right at dusk, by the way. I didn't know that, because otherwise when you take a picture of the beach, you're going, because of the brightness, unless you got your sunglasses on. But at dusk, it's dark, and so you can see like how you normally would look, I guess. You're not squinting. And so he took a picture of our son, Matthew, and he'd only been walking for a couple of months, and he's there, and he's got his hair down into his eyes, and you can just see his expression. And that was about a year and a half ago. And I look at that picture, and I see, that little boy is gone. That little boy is totally different now. I look at him now, and he's talking, and obviously he's very smart, and I see him now, and then I realize, this little boy is soon going to be gone. In fact, he changes every week. I see he's growing. He's about to get where he can bump his head on the counter as he walks around. Molly had to put up some protect, something there to keep him from injuring himself walking into the counter, which I did that a lot as a kid, walking into open microwaves and things. That's what's probably my problem, But he's changing every day. And so I look at him and I think, this little boy is not going to be here very long. So I better soak up every moment. I better enjoy every moment and not waste it by being distracted about nothing and about something I can do nothing about. To be attentive, to be present to the people in your life. And here, she's being visited by Jesus in the flesh. And she's too worried about all her preparations. And so Jesus says to her, Martha, Martha, just like he'd be saying to you and to me, Matt, look at what you're missing. You're worried and upset about so many things. You're worried, upset about so many things that don't matter. But there's only a few things that are needed, that are really, really, really important. And the interesting thing is that Jesus saved the world without a smartphone. I mean, how he did it, I don't know, but he did it. Few things are needed, or indeed, only one. Really only one. Ultimately, all the other things come out of that one thing. And guess what? Mary's doing that right now. It's being attentive to me. Mary has chosen what is better. Not that serving is not good and important, to be attentive to the details. That's all great and important. But this is what's most important. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. She'll have this memory forever. She'll always remember the day Jesus came into my house and He talked to me. And He taught me. I got to hear the voice of the one who spoke creation into existence. And I was there and I heard it because I wasn't distracted by everything else. I was attentive in the moment. She'll never lose it. And bless your heart, Martha, I love you, but you missed it. Now, of course, we know there's going to be future chances for Martha and for all of us who are worried and distracted by many things. But you're going to only get this moment to hear His voice. You're only going to get this day to spend. This only April 29, 2018 only comes one time. You're only going to get this season to spend with your spouse or your kids. It only comes one time. You're changing too. They're changing. I wonder For how many of us, we're missing what's the one thing that's needed because we're attending to the many things? When you're a multitasker, when you're a perfectionist, when it's never good enough, very frequently you're worried and upset about many things. You'll always be able to find something to be worried about and upset about. But Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 27, as we're often worried and upset and distracted, which leads to a lack of our connection with other people and ultimately even a lack of connection with God. Jesus said, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me." They listen to my voice. You see, just because you hear something doesn't mean you're listening. But you can't listen without hearing. To hear, we must listen. If we're going to hear what they're saying, how much will we miss? How many moments will we miss because we were distracted? And ultimately, that's how all of us grow. And that's how relationships develop. Yes, there will be moments when you are bored. And you're wondering why they keep going on and on and on and on and on. And I don't agree with that. And so I'm just going to tune them out. Just going to flip the channel, you know. We only listen to who we want to listen to. We usually only listen to people that we agree with. But that's how you learn to be patient. That's how you learn to love other people in spite of their faults. Just the way that God loves you in spite of your faults. And God loves me in spite of my faults. That's how we grow. That's how relationships, the meaningful relationships, that's how we really connect. Is because we listen. We do the hard work of listening. So, maybe it's time to sign out. Maybe it's time to take this and throw it in the garbage. No, just kidding. Just kidding about that. Okay. They do make our lives more convenient. Okay. And I could argue safer and we're more efficient, which I love efficiency. I'm a Martha. Okay. What can I say? But no, but maybe there's boundaries that we can put in place. There's boundaries that can help us from, instead of using this as a tool, to becoming its tool. To be in a place where you're missing all of those moments because you're too distracted. And you're going to look 10 years down the road and all those moments passed you by and you spent much of your life staring at this over nothing. Maybe just some boundaries put in place. And some of these I give credit to Andy Crouch, who wrote the book, The Tech-Wise Family. A couple of these come from him. These are just some practical points as to ways that you can sacrifice availability to be present with the people in your lives and to God. Just some suggestions on ways to trade availability for presence. You can take them or leave them, okay? 1, no tech time at table time. Now, I encourage you, as a family, and if you're single, maybe you have time that you spend with friends that spend around a table. I mean, some of the best fellowship moments in life happen around food. Some of the most meaningful moments, conversations in life happen around a dinner. Yeah, that's where I met my wife. We had dinner. It was our first date. It wouldn't have been very cool if I was doing this the whole time, you know. But that happens. You see people in restaurants sitting across the seat from each other, and they're looking at their phone, or maybe even at home. Put it away. I don't care. Maybe it's going crazy, and you think somebody's having an emergency, and you need to check it. Okay, maybe there's ways you can put filters on all of that, so that if there's a real emergency, they can get through to you. But put it away. Use that time to connect with the people in your life around the table. And then when the dinner's over, you can go back and check it. Secondly, car time is conversation time. Now, some of you, this is like, oh my gosh, no. Okay, it's like, this is horrible. Why would we leave now? Okay, but no. But how many times do you drive by somebody and they're on the interstate and they pass you and the person in the passenger seat is just scrolling through. They're not trying to connect in any way, talk with the person and the other people in the car. I mean, that's a time where you're all together in the same space. You can't go anywhere. You're locked in, okay? And how many meaningful conversations happen in a car? This is where you have to push past that 7 minutes. You have to get to a place that if you're going to connect, that you open up. And I know for me and my wife, we got 2 boys in the back seat. We like it when they don't cry, okay? They're very young. But sometimes it's just good for us just to get out and go for a drive. We talk in the car in a way that's kind of informal. It's something about being in the car together that you can talk. And there's ways to interact as a family. And I know that as the kids get older, maybe they're listening to something on music or whatever in the back seat. They don't want to listen to what you're listening to, And so, but maybe this is as it can encourage interaction in the car, conversation. And thirdly, you don't want to leave this one out, put the phone away at prayer time. I'll bet more and more people feel less connected to God today in this season because they're distracted. And it's so easy because prayer is hard sometimes. Your mind wanders, you sit there in silence, unless God just speaks audibly to you every time that you pray. It doesn't usually happen that way with me. You have to still ourselves, and sometimes we're so distracted and our minds go in so many different directions to be still in His presence. So put it away. And for me, sometimes I find myself checking email or Facebook for prayer requests. Just want to see who can I pray for today. Because people will post that on Facebook. And that's the way I sometimes do that in my prayer time. But I've also found that when I do that, it's easy to kind of drift into other areas, other places. The news, sports, whatever. And I know some of you have a Bible app. That's great. Maybe you're using that today. But it's just too tempting to drift somewhere else. Get a bound Bible and use that for your prayer time. I encourage you to do that unless you're more disciplined than I am in that regard. In the 1950s, Billy Graham was really reaching his prime. He was becoming famous, and he traveled around the world preaching, and they called that era the Age of Anxiety because it was after World War II, and the nuclear reality of the possibility of nuclear war was heavy on everyone's mind. And he preached the gospel in the age of anxiety is what they described it. But psychiatrists today or scientists today, I don't know how they do this, but they say that the anxiety level of young people today, I think this could apply to older people too, but the anxiety of younger people today is the equivalent of those who were in psychiatric hospitals in the 1950s. Okay? So in those who were in the psychiatric hospitals in the 1950s, that's the anxiety level of those of us who are being raised in the digital world today. Okay, those who are being raised in the digital world today. Again, I don't know how they study that and find that out. But there is incredible anxiety on the part of our young people and adults too. And maybe the solution to that anxiety isn't being attentive to more things, to many things, but to fewer things. And specifically to the one thing. We're going to talk more about how to do that as this series continues next week.